Have you ever had to play peacekeeper in your household?
Imagine waking up one morning to find your whole life packed into cardboard boxes on the driveway, your kids' laughter echoing from a car driving away with your ex, and the judge's gavel still ringing in your ears like a bad dream you can't shake. That's where my story starts, not with a bang, but with the quiet unraveling of everything I thought was mine. And then, in the dustiest corner of my late mom's creaky old country house, I stumbled on something that flipped the script, a secret so buried, it could either rebuild me or bury me deeper. Stick around, because what I found wasn't just papers, it was payback waiting to happen, and trust me, it gets twistier than a politician's promise. I never saw the divorce coming like a freight train, but looking back, the signs were there in Tom's wandering eyes and those late nights at the office that smelled more like cheap perfume than deadlines. We had built this life in Cleveland, the kind of suburban dream with a sprawling mansion on a cul-de-sac, two kids who thought we hung the moon, and me holding down a job as a real estate agent while he climbed the corporate ladder at that big auto parts firm. But one Tuesday in spring, after 20 years of marriage, he sat me down with his lawyer in tow and laid it out. He wanted out, and he wanted everything. The judge, some stern woman who barely looked up from her notes, sided with him on most counts, citing my so-called emotional instability from a rough patch after Mom died 2 years back. Just like that, I lost the kids, custody to Tom during the week, me getting weekends if I played nice, the mansion sold to cover his debts, and my dignity shredded in front of friends who suddenly stopped calling. All I had left was Mom's old country house out in rural Ohio, a sagging two-story thing with peeling paint and memories of summers picking apples in the yard. It was her gift, or so the will said, but it felt more like a consolation prize, a dusty relic from her life as a widow scraping by on Social Security. I drove out there a week after the final papers, my SUV loaded with whatever boxes Tom hadn't claimed, feeling like a failure who'd been spit out by the system. The house smelled of mothballs and faint lavender from Mom's soaps, and as I wandered the living room, dodging stacks of old newspapers, I decided to tackle the cleaning right away, anything to keep my mind off the empty ache in my chest. That's when I noticed the bookshelf in the corner, one of those heavy oak numbers Dad built before he passed. It wobbled when I bumped it, and behind it, a glint of metal caught my eye, a safe, embedded in the wall like something out of a spy novel, its dial worn but intact. My heart skipped. Mom never mentioned this, not in all our talks about her frugal ways. I tried a few codes at random, her birthday, Dad's, the house number, but nothing budged. Then, on a whim, I punched in my own birthday, the one she always baked a cake for even when money was tight. Click. It opened with a soft groan, revealing a yellowed envelope inside, addressed to me in her looping handwriting. I sank to the floor right there, dust bunnies dancing in the sunlight slanting through the lace curtains, and tore it open. The letter started simple enough. Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, life's thrown you one of its curveballs, and you need a hand up. This secret has always been my trump card. My hands shook as I read on, her words painting pictures of hard choices she'd made long ago, hints at something big she'd kept locked away to protect us all. But the letter cut off mid-sentence, like she'd second-guessed spilling the beans, leaving instructions to look in her hope chest upstairs for the rest. What kind of trump card could a woman like Mom, who pinched pennies for every grocery run and mended clothes until they fell apart, possibly have hidden away? I sat there for what felt like hours, the paper crinkling in my grip, my mind spinning through memories of her quiet strength. She was the type who faced down bank foreclosures with a smile and a potluck, never complaining about the hand dealt her after Dad's heart attack left us scrambling. And now this, whatever it was, seemed tied to me, unlocked by my birthday, like she'd known I'd end up here someday, at rock bottom. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Here I was, 48 years old, divorced and destitute, playing detective in my childhood home. But another part, the one still raw from court, felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the edge I needed against Tom, that smug operator who'd lawyered his way to keeping the kids full-time and the house that I'd picked out myself. As the afternoon light faded, turning the room all golden and somber, I folded the letter and tucked it into my pocket, the weight of it like a promise or a warning. Upstairs, The hope chest waited, but before heading up, I glanced at the boxes from the old life, photos of family vacations, the kids' baby books, and there, tangled in one of Tom's god-awful ties. The silk one with the stripes he wore to every big meeting like a badge of his success. He'd left it behind on purpose, I bet, a little jab to remind me of what I'd lost. Well, two could play at that. I grabbed it, marched out to the front porch, and with a satisfying flick, tossed it into the overgrown weeds by the steps, imagining it snagged and forgotten. It was petty, sure, but in that moment, it felt like reclaiming a sliver of ground, a tiny win in a sea of losses. Still, as I climbed the creaky stairs, the unfinished words from Mom's letter echoed in my head, pulling me forward with a mix of dread and determination. What secrets had she buried that could change everything, and at what cost? The house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for me to uncover the next piece, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever came next would drag me deeper into a tangle I wasn't ready for. Upstairs in Mom's bedroom, the air hung heavy with the scent of aged wood and those lavender sachets she tucked into drawers to chase away the mustiness, and there at the foot of her brass bed sat the hope chest, a sturdy pine thing she'd painted folk patterns on during one of her crafty phases after Dad died. I remembered her opening it now and then to show me treasures like my first ballet slippers or a pressed flower from our last family picnic, always with that knowing smile that said life was tough but worth the fight, and as I lifted the lid with creaking hinges, a wave of nostalgia mixed with the fresh sting of curiosity washed over me, making my fingers tremble slightly on the worn fabric inside. Under layers of yellowed linens and bundled scarves lay the continuation of her secret, not just more letters, but a small stack of photographs curled at the edges, one in particular catching the light, a black and white shot of Mom in her 20s, arm-linked with a tall man in a sharp suit, both laughing under what looked like the old oak tree out back, and on the back in her script, Harold and me, 1972, our little agreement sealed with a promise. The letters unfolded like chapters in a hidden diary, detailing how after Dad's early passing left her with two girls to raise on waitress tips and odd jobs, she'd crossed paths with Harold Whitaker at a county fair where he was the big landowner schmoozing farmers. And what started as innocent chats over apple pie turned into a discreet arrangement where he provided for us in ways she could never admit, monthly envelopes of cash that paid for my braces and Lisa's piano lessons without a trace back to him or his high society wife who wintered in Palm Beach. Reading deeper into the yellowed pages, her words carried a mix of regret and defiance, explaining how she'd insisted on safeguards like that notarized paper in the safe, a quiet claim on part of his estate should he ever renege, calling it her trump card. Because in a world that chewed up single moms, she needed something to play when the odds stacked against her, and the fact that the safe opened to my birthday wasn't coincidence, but her way of saying I was the one who'd need it most someday. It hit me hard, sitting cross-legged on the hooked rug amid the scattered photos, that she'd carried this burden alone for decades, shielding us from scandal while scraping by, and now here I was, unraveling it all in the wake of my own marital wreckage, wondering if this legacy of secrets would save me or just paint me in the same compromised light. Humor crept in despite the heaviness, a wry chuckle escaping as I pictured Mom, with her no-nonsense bun and sensible shoes, playing the long game like some undercover operative in a bad detective flick, outsmarting the system that had tried to break her just as it was breaking me now. But the light vulgarity of it all, the idea of her as this shadowy figure trading favors for survival, made my cheeks flush, not with judgment, but a strange solidarity. Because who'd blame a woman for grabbing what she could when the deck was marked against her from the start? I needed perspective, someone to ground this whirlwind before it spun me out, so I grabbed my phone and dialed Lisa, my sister who's always been the rock, running that cozy bakery in Columbus where the smell of fresh bread draws in locals like bees to honey. And when she picked up amid the clatter of mixing bowls, I dove right in, voice cracking as I described the safe, the letter, the photos of this Harold fellow who looked every bit the silver-haired fox from old money tales. She listened quietly at first, her end of the line filling with the hum of her oven timer, then let out a skeptical huff that carried all the weight of our shared history. saying something about how grief plays tricks and maybe I was projecting Tom's sleaze onto Mom's memory, but I could hear the intrigue seeping through her words, the way she paused before asking for details on the estate claim, and by the end of the call, she'd agreed to drive out tomorrow with her laptop to help dig online, though not without a gentle ribbing about my tendency to chase rainbows after storms. Hanging up left me with a fragile thread of connection, but just as I started sorting the photos back into the chest, my phone buzzed again, this time with Tom's number flashing like an unwelcome intruder, his voice smooth as oil when I answered, claiming he was just checking in on the kids' schedule but probing too casually about the house, asking if I'd listed it yet or found anything valuable in Mom's clutter. The nerve of him, that snake who'd lawyered his way to keeping the mansion and primary custody while I got scraps, made my blood simmer, but I kept it cool, deflecting with vague nods until he hung up with a chuckle that grated like sandpaper. In the quiet that followed, as twilight filtered through the gauzy curtains turning the room all soft and shadowy, I ran my hands along the chest's inner lining one last time, feeling a seam give way under pressure, and there it was, taped discreetly, a small brass key. Cool and heavy, engraved with initials that matched the photo's herald, HW's staring back at me like a dare. What lock did it fit? Some forgotten drawer in town or a bigger door to Mom's past that could append everything Tom thought he controlled? The question hung in the air, thick as the dust settling around me, promising answers that might either arm me for the fight ahead or expose fractures I wasn't prepared to face. Before turning in for the night, that petty spark from earlier reignited, and I fired off an anonymous tip to Tom's boss via a throwaway email, mentioning that little slip-up from last year's audit where he'd padded mileage on those golf outings. Nothing criminal, but enough to make the higher-ups side-eye his next report. It was a low blow, I knew, but hearing the satisfaction in my own exhale as I hit send felt like evening the score just a touch. A clever nudge in the ribs for the man who'd left me high and dry. Still, with the key now jingling in my pocket like a talisman, sleep came fitful, dreams tangled with images of hidden doors and family ghosts whispering warnings about the price of pulling that trump card too soon. Lisa pulled up the next morning right on time, her minivan loaded with a box of fresh donuts from the bakery that still carried that warm cinnamon scent even through the closed windows. And as she stepped out in her practical jeans and a sweater that looked hand-knitted by one of her kids, I could see the mix of concern and curiosity etched on her face. The kind that comes from years of being the sibling who cleans up messes without asking questions first. We hugged briefly on the porch, her embrace firm but quick like she was bracing for whatever bombshell I'd dropped on the phone last night. And once inside at the kitchen table scattered with the letters and that brass key glinting under the morning light filtering through the checkered curtains, she wasted no time diving in, her baker's hands, strong from kneading dough, flipping through the pages with a precision that made me grateful she'd come. The skepticism melted a bit as she read aloud from one of Harold's notes, his formal tone describing our understanding in terms that hinted at more than just financial help. Words like lasting bond and shared future that painted Mom not as a victim, but as a partner in a risky dance. And Lisa's eyes widened when we hit the part about the estate share, her voice trailing off with a low whistle that said this was no tall tale spun from divorce bitterness. We spent the first hour piecing it together over black coffee in mismatched mugs, the steam rising like unspoken worries, and what emerged was a clearer picture of Mom's affair, not some torrid romance novel fling but a steady, secret support system where Harold funneled money through back channels to keep us afloat, his guilt over a childless marriage with that frosty socialite wife pushing him to provide for the family he'd helped create indirectly, though the letters stopped short of confirming blood ties, leaving just enough ambiguity to make my pulse quicken every time I reread them. Lisa leaned back then, rubbing her temples with a half-smile that carried a touch of dark humor, joking how Mom must have been the original multitasker, juggling shifts at the diner and this clandestine lifeline without ever letting on, and I nodded, adding my own wry twist about how if she'd taught us girls anything, it was that sometimes you had to play your cards close to keep the wolves from the door. though the light vulgarity of picturing her outwitting a rich man's conscience made us both chuckle uneasily, a brief light in the growing shadow of what this meant for our family lore. Energized by the sugar rush from the donuts, glazed ones that stuck to our fingers like the stickiness of this revelation, we turned to the key, starting our hunt in the attic where dust motes danced in the beams from the single bulb, rummaging through trunks filled with Dad's old tools and holiday decorations that brought back flashes of Christmases when money was tight, but the tree always sparkled. Nothing fit up there, so we moved downstairs to the living room, testing drawers and cabinets until Lisa suggested the cellar door under the stairs. That narrow panel I'd always avoided as a kid because it led to damp darkness and spiderwebs that gave me the shivers. The key slid in with a satisfying click, not opening a full room but revealing a shallow compartment carved into the wall, its door swinging out to expose a metal lockbox crusted with age, and inside lay bank statements from the 70s and 80s. Yellowed slips showing regular deposits into an account under Mom's name. Each one initialed HW in bold strokes that matched the photos. One statement in particular stopped us cold, a marginal note in Mom's handwriting reading for SJ Keep Safe, our bond endures, the initials hitting like a quiet thunderclap because SJ could only mean me, Sarah Jenkins, raising the ghost of a possibility that Harold's involvement ran deeper than cash handouts, perhaps even to my very origins if Dad's timeline didn't quite line up with my birth date the way memory sometimes fudged it. Lisa set the papers down gently, her face paling as she voiced the dilemma we'd both skirted, saying a DNA test might confirm it, but at the cost of rewriting our whole family tree, especially now when the kids were already pulling away in the divorce fallout. And right on cue, my phone pinged with a text from Emily, my 14-year-old firecracker of a daughter, her words sharp as a tack. Dad says you're hoarding junk to mess with him. Skipping visitation this weekend, too much drama. It landed like a punch, Tom's influence seeping in like poison ivy through the cracks, turning my own flesh and blood against me just when I needed them close, and I typed back a neutral okay, swallowing the lump in my throat because arguing now would only widen the gap. The afternoon dragged with that weight, us cataloging the statements into a neat pile while Lisa shared stories from her own marriage about spotting red flags early, her humor cutting through when she quipped that Tom was the type who'd sell his soul for a corner office. But the uncertainty gnawed, making every creak of the house feel like a warning. Then, as the sun dipped low casting long shadows across the floorboards, tires crunched on the gravel outside, and there was Tom, striding up like he owned the deed already, his button-down shirt tucked just so and that salesman grin plastered on, claiming he was just passing by to discuss the kids, but his eyes roamed the room like a hawk spotting prey. We stepped out to the porch to avoid a scene, the air cooling with evening's approach, and he laid it out plain. He'd lined up a realtor to appraise the place, figuring since I was struggling, selling it quick would be a mercy. Pocketing a cut for his troubles because in his twisted logic, everything tied back to him through our shared past. I held my ground, mentioning nothing of the safe or key, but his parting shot lingered like smoke. Don't drag this out, Sarah. Some secrets aren't worth keeping. As his sedan peeled away, leaving a cloud of dust that mirrored the turmoil in my chest, anger sharpened into focus, and I recalled from mutual friends how Tom prided himself on his golf game at the country club, that ego boost he lorded over everyone. A quick, anonymous post to the club's online forum under a fake name spun a tale of his epic slice into the pond during last month's tournament, embellished with just enough detail from old photos to make it stick as the evening's gossip fodder. It was witty payback, a pinprick to his vanity without drawing blood, and imagining the chuckles at his expense brought a grim smile as Lisa and I locked the compartment tight. But with Tom's threat hanging over us like a storm cloud, and those initials SJ burning in my mind, the real question clawed deeper. How far back did this secret stretch, and what would unravel if I pulled the thread just a little more? With Tom's dust clouds still settling in the driveway like the remnants of his overbearing presence, Lisa and I retreated inside to the kitchen where the afternoon sun slanted through the windows casting striped shadows on the linoleum floor we'd scrubbed together as kids, and over a pot of tea steeped strong enough to match our resolve, we hashed out the next move. Her practical mind zeroing in on the need for professional eyes before we waded deeper into this potential minefield of legal entanglements and family upheavals. The bank statements from the compartment painted a damning picture of Harold's consistent support, deposits that coincided with our leanest years, like the time the roof leaked through a harsh winter and Mom somehow afforded the repairs without a loan. But without expert guidance, we risked misstepping into something that could boomerang back on us, especially with Tom circling like a vulture scenting vulnerability. Lisa pulled up her laptop right there, fingers flying over the keys to search for estate lawyers in the county seat, landing on a firm that handled old probate cases, the kind where dusty wills from the 80s might still hold water if properly leveraged, and by evening's end. We'd scheduled a meeting for the next day with a partner named Hargrove who'd been practicing since before Harold's heyday. The drive to the law office the following morning felt charged with a mix of anticipation and nerves, the rural roads winding past cornfields turning golden in the fall light while Lisa drove, her minivan humming steadily as she filled the silence with light-hearted jabs about how this adventure beat her usual routine of yeast rising and customer complaints, though underneath her humor lurked the same uncertainty gnawing at me, the fear that digging up Mom's past might unearth more dirt than gold. Hargrove's office sat in a brick building downtown, all polished wood panels and the faint smell of leather-bound books that screamed small-town respectability, and the man himself, silver-haired with wire-rimmed glasses and a tie that looked like it hadn't changed since Reagan, greeted us with a handshake firm but not flashy, his eyes sharpening when I mentioned Harold Whitaker and the codicil tucked away in probate records. He excused himself to the file room, returning with a thick folder that he spread across his desk like a map to buried treasure, the pages crackling as he explained how Harold's will had included provisions for discreet beneficiaries, a euphemism for mistresses and their kin in those pre-DNA days, with Mom positioned as guardian for any resulting claims, a trust fund valued at the time around $100,000 adjusted for inflation to something substantial now. But the twist that made my stomach drop came midway through, Hargrove's finger tapping a notation about partial disbursements from the trust in the 90s. Access not by Mom, but through a power of attorney linked to a junior auditor at Tom's auto parts firm who was rising fast back then, and as the pieces clicked, it dawned that Tom himself had been that auditor, hired on a contract to review Harold's estate for tax efficiencies during our early marriage when he was still pretending to be the devoted husband building our future. He'd spotted the hidden assets, siphoned details to pad his reports and bonuses, shorting Mom's share by rerouting funds into anonymous accounts that later funneled into our joint savings, the very nest egg he claimed solely in the divorce as his hard-earned windfall. It was betrayal layered on betrayal, the man I'd shared a bed with for 2 decades not just cheating on me but profiting off my own mother's sacrifices, turning her trump card into his stepping stone, and Hargrove's measured tone as he outlined a path to reclaim it through quiet litigation only amplified the rage bubbling inside, mixed with a bitter laugh at the irony of how Tom's greed had always been there, slithering under the surface like a snake in the garden we once called home. Lisa squeezed my hand under the table, her face a mask of controlled shock, but the dilemma hit hardest when my phone vibrated with a voicemail from Jake, my 16-year-old son whose voice cracked with teenage frustration, saying Emily had convinced him to back out of the weekend visit because Mom's acting crazy with Grandpa's old stuff, Tom's whispers clearly at work to keep them loyal to his side of the story. Skipping that time with them to chase this lead felt like another cut in the custody wars, a choice that prioritized payback over presence, and though part of me screamed to drop it all and drive straight to Cleveland for a family reconciliation, the evidence in Hargrove's folder whispered promises of stability, enough to fight for equal custody and a fresh start, so I silenced the phone and nodded when the lawyer suggested drafting a preliminary demand, my mind already racing ahead to the confrontation that loomed. We left the office with copies in hand, the weight of those papers heavier than the folder itself, and on the ride back, Lisa's humor surfaced again, quipping that Tom must have a black belt in backstabbing to pull off something this slick, easing the tension just enough to keep me from unraveling completely. Back at the house as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples, Tom's text arrived like clockwork, inquiring about the property's status, with that faux politeness that masked his impatience, but armed with partial evidence. A redacted statement showing his firm's involvement. I felt the power shift, though Hargrove advised holding off until the full claim was ironclad. The cliffhanger of it all pressed in, the need to face him soon with just enough to rattle his cage without tipping my hand completely, and in a stroke of impulsive wit, I crafted a fake email from the country club, posing as the events coordinator to invite him to an exclusive, executive retreat overlapping his custody weekend, complete with urgent RSVPs and fabricated VIP perks that would tie him up in travel plans and force cancellations with the kids. Watching the confirmation bounce back in his replies, scrambling to adjust, brought that satisfying twist of revenge, clever enough to sting without a trace back to me. But as night deepened and the house creaked around the secrets we'd stirred, the real uncertainty settled in. What if showing Tom this glimpse unleashed a counterattack that cost more than it gained, dragging the kids deeper into the crossfire before I could play the full trump card? The bank vault's chill seeped through the heavy steel door as Hargrove led us down the dimly lit corridor the next morning, the echo of our footsteps amplifying the gravity of what lay ahead. A place where secrets from decades past slumbered in locked boxes like forgotten promises waiting for their moment, and I clutched the key from Mom's chest in my pocket, its edges digging into my palm as a reminder that this wasn't just about money, but reclaiming the dignity she'd stashed away for a rainy day like the one now drenching my life. Lisa walked beside me, her presence a steady anchor amid the uncertainty swirling in my head. The weight of skipping another call with the kids last night pressing like a stone, because every step toward this revelation pulled me further from the simple path of mending fences. A choice that twisted the knife in my gut, knowing Emily and Jake might see me as the villain chasing ghosts over their stability. Hargrove unlocked the compartment with practiced efficiency, the lid lifting to reveal stacks of ledgers and affidavits that Hargrove sifted through methodically, his voice steady as he outlined the full scope. Harold's trust, untouched in its core since the partial siphons Tom orchestrated, held not just the original sum but compounded interest from smart investments Mom had quietly directed, pushing the value close to $500,000, enough to rewrite my post-divorce scramble into something resembling security. Deeper in the files, the trump card emerged in stark black ink, a sworn statement from Harold dated weeks before his fatal car accident in '87, acknowledging Mom as the mother of his only child, with medical notations hinting at a paternity test he'd commissioned in secret, the results buried to protect reputations, but confirming the blood tie that made me his heir. Not just beneficiary, but legitimate claimant to a slice of the Whitaker land holdings that had ballooned into prime development real estate over the years. It wasn't a fairy tale bombshell that erased my life with Dad, whose love had been real even if biology played tricks, but the ambiguity of it all, the way the papers danced around full disclosure, left me reeling. Emotions crashing like waves against the vault's unyielding walls, anger at Tom's exploitation mixing with a profound sorrow for Mom's lifelong silence, the sacrifices she'd made to shield us from scandal while he turned her leverage into his gain. Hargrove nodded gravely as he drafted the demand letter on the spot, incorporating the evidence of Tom's audit fraud, those rerouted funds that had padded our lifestyle only to be clawed back in court, and I added a personal flourish, slipping in a scanned photo from the hope chest of Mom cradling baby me under that same oak tree, captioned simply, "Time to settle the debts you owe to the women who built you up." The confrontation unfolded that evening at the neutral ground of Millie's Diner on the edge of town, the same spot where Tom and I had shared greasy burgers on early dates when life seemed full of promise, its vinyl booths worn smooth from years of locals hashing out troubles over pie, and as he slid in across from me with his usual air of entitlement, ordering black coffee like he was holding court, I felt the shift in the air. The power no longer tilted solely his way. Hargrove waited outside with Lisa, giving me the space to deliver the blow personally, and when I pushed the folder across the Formica table, His smirk faltered into confusion, then outright pallor as he scanned the affidavits. The ledgers exposing his fingerprints on the skimmed assets, the paternity claim that tied my inheritance directly to Harold's estate, bypassing any marital claims he might fabricate. He blustered at first, voice rising in denials about ancient history and threats of countersuits that rang hollow against the ironclad proof, but by the time the waitress refilled our cups, he was signing the agreement Hargrove had prepared, releasing the full trust to me, adjusting custody to joint with expanded visitation, and wiring restitution for the fraud. His empire of lies crumbling under the weight of Mom's long-buried ace. The revenge crystallized in the quiet aftermath, not with shouts or spectacle, but a calculated leak to his corporate board. An anonymous packet of redacted audit discrepancies mailed overnight that would surface just enough to derail his promotion without naming names, a witty unraveling of his facade that left him scrambling in the shadows he'd cast over us for so long. Driving back to the country house under a starlit sky that felt clearer for the first time in months, the check's promise humming in my account app, satisfaction bloomed warm and real, the clever justice of it all easing the scars from the divorce like balm on old wounds. But as I pulled into the gravel drive, the porch light flickering like Mom's watchful eye, the kids' excited texts lit up my phone, Emily gushing about weekend plans, Jake asking about the cool old house, yet laced with questions that pierced the victory. Did you really mess with Dad's job, Mom? Is this about Grandpa's secrets? Lisa's follow-up call carried the same caution, reminding me the land claim had loose ends, potential other heirs or clauses that could drag this out, and Hargrove's email mentioned unresolved probate threads from Harold's side that might invite challenges. Sitting on the steps with Mom's letter in hand, the night air carrying the earthy scent of turned soil from the fields beyond, doubt crept in like fog rolling off the river, whispering if the trump cards play had truly won back my dignity or merely traded one set of riffs for another, the family bonds strained by my pursuit of payback over patience. Had I honored Mom's intent by wielding her secret as a weapon, or twisted it into something that echoed Tom's own greed, leaving the kids to navigate the fallout of a truth half revealed? The house loomed silent behind me, full of echoes and what-ifs, the road ahead branching into possibilities that could heal the fractures or widen them forever, and as the stars wheeled overhead, I wondered if some legacies are meant to stay locked. Their power more in the knowing than the unleashing, a question that lingers like the unfinished sentence in her note, inviting you to ponder what card you'd play next in the hand life deals.